thank you. Really good to hear some great conversations going on when I was downstairs in the library. And thank you for coming back for our second session, which we're going to have a little bit more look at innovation and tech through the lens of what consumers want. Are their expectations changing? How do firms need to respond to those changing expectations if indeed consumers' expectations are changing? Now, I know some of you have already replied to our Slido poll, which we're running in the break, but if you haven't, there's still about 5-10 minutes for you to respond. Go on the QR code on the programme, and that is about whether law firms sort of the future will need to provide sort of 24/7 services. So please respond there. But otherwise, I'm delighted to be joined by our second panel. At the end here, we have Edward, who runs Carrig Law, which is, I think we've already heard from him, a firm out in West Wales. And then next we have Lisa, who's a member of the Legal Services Consumer Panel and is also a chief executive of, I think, Epson Citizens Advice. And then we've got Pierre next to me, who's sort of founded and run a variety of startups, most recently Lawhive, which we'll hear a bit more about. And then finally, we've got Rachel, who works at the University of the West of England and also runs a law clinic there. Now, again, like the first session, I've got a few questions, but the opening question I wanted to ask each of our panellists was, when it comes to using and choosing legal services, what do customers expect? And I'll start with you, Edward.
It's quite an easy one for me to answer. I think customers expect free legal advice and they expect it fast.
Job done. There we go. That's,
They genuinely do. And running a business, that's quite hard to face day in, day out, that attitude. And I think we heard earlier about AI and the ability for technology to provide answers very quickly and cheaply. We're as a law firm, really fighting that. I suppose if I ask my sensible customers or clients what they appreciate, it's speed of communication and ease of communication. They want to see me, they want to speak to me, and that's always one of the priorities. Then, interestingly, post-pandemic, it's been the location of our law firm situated in Wales. People who are buying and selling in Wales want to use solicitors in Wales because they think that we have the local knowledge, the local contacts and expertise. And that's been quite an interesting change since the pandemic.
So you think that locality has become more important?
More important, yeah.
And is there an issue of trust as well, that someone who perhaps is from the same area sort of looks and speaks like them? Is that an issue, do you think?
No, but I'd say that in our area in particular, a lot of clients don't have technology, don't have access to it, don't have fibre, broadband, mobile phone signal. A lot of them just come into the office with paperwork and just expect you to just deal with it. So it doesn't matter what suite of technology you've got in the office, they want to see you as a human being and they want a table and talk it out. Behind the scenes, we use technology to make the business efficient, but in terms of what the customers want, it is changing, but I'd still say 40 to 50% of the customers still want to see you in person. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah, which is going to be different too, I think.
Yes. We've deliberately set up a sort of face-off either side of me. So, so thank you, Edward. That was great. So, Lisa, what about you?
So I'm wearing two hats today. So as has been said in the introduction, I'm from the Legal Services Consumer Panel, but also from Citizens Advice. So what I wanted to do is try and sort of show both sides, so you can sort of have a bit more of a background. For those that don't know the Legal Services Consumer Panel, just really briefly, we're a completely independent organization, and we provide advice to legal services regulators, and that's really to help them to create regulation that takes into account the consumers. So what are we seeing on the Legal Services Consumer Panel side of things in terms, firstly, of choosing legal services? Consumers love to shop around. That's a really top one. So this year we've had 39% of people shopping around, which I think is a really, really big number. Then we have price. 56% of our consumers have said that they have compared price when looking at which provider to choose. And then we also have reputation. So those are I would say the three key aims. In terms of citizens' advice, very similar. We're a free service, so of course, cost and price is a key factor for many people. But I think what's also really, really important, and it came up in the previous panel, which talked about the needs and specific needs of consumers. So what we have is that 40% of our clients are reporting that they have long-term health conditions and/or disabilities. And those are the ones that we know about. So there'll be a huge proportion of people that we don't know about. We don't as yet have figures in terms of digital exclusion, but we know it's high. And also we have a number of clients that are coming to us that are illiterate and enumerate. So what that means is, similar to you, that whole issue around the human interaction is really, really important. So, what does that human interaction look like? For us as Citizens Advice, it's all about support. People need support, and it needs to be individualized. It needs to be specific support for their specific needs. We're also finding proximity, again, very, very much so the case. A lot of that seems to be linked to people with specific sort of physical ailments or physical disabilities. And then just generally access, how do they access those services? And as I've outlined, the digital exclusion is quite huge, and I'll come on to talk about that as well. Just in terms of using legal services, we've got some data, and this data is sort of hot off the press because our Legal Services Consumer Panel Tracker Survey will be coming out and be published later on this month. So we've got some up-to-date data in terms of how consumers are using legal services. The first thing is they really, really just want good customer service, and that's regardless of the outcome. What does that mean? Communication, keeping people informed, keeping them up to date on the progress of their case. It seems simple, but it's a huge, huge issue. Again, after the pandemic, we are noticing that more consumers are preferring a hybrid approach to service delivery. So that initial meeting, they really would prefer that initial meeting to be face-to-face. And then the sort of updates, it's fine for that to be via email or in some other form. But they really, really do value that, putting a face to a name. This is the person that's going to take care of me and my case. And finally, they really want to be able to track progress online. So, if there's a way that they can go on and sort of see, I see my case is pending here, that sort of gives a lot of reassurance and trust in the process.
Thank you, Lisa. Really interesting, the point around communication. We did some research at the SRA to look at what solicitors thought was the priority for customers versus what customers thought was the priority. And solicitors said that their number one priority they thought was the outcome. Did we win? Was it complete, etc.? And actually, consumers had that as number 3. What they said was number 1 was the communication, understanding how the case is progressing. So an interesting, an interesting challenge there. So Pierre, over to you. What do you think?
So I mean, just to narrate the context of the dichotomy maybe on this panel, LawHive is a fully regulated platform that combines tech and a licensed and regulated ABS law firm to allow solicitors from across the country to work with any client in the country fully flexibly online. And our model, I mean, obviously our observations from the tens of thousands of consumers that come to our site every month looking for online access to their legal rights and the law is that there is very much a consumer appetite for, really it comes back to the old-fashioned values, the C's, cost and convenience. It's just that cost and convenience has moved on in terms of how consumers and the bar for what consumers now think of as a good user experience has changed considerably. And so our focus is to kind of bring a better user experience to the law, not only for the consumer, but we think it starts with a better user experience for the lawyer. And that's the key to solving a lot of the consumer issues in the legal market. So the traditional method of sort of cost and convenience was going up to the high street and knocking on the door and waiting in the waiting room and dumping your papers on the desk, as Edward has described. Things have moved on considerably, both in terms of the high street, obviously, as we can all see in our high streets, but also in terms of what is possible with product. And so, there was a lot of conversation earlier in the day about AI. AI is a small piece of it, but really it's technology and product has moved on considerably, and the potential that we have in transforming industries and transforming experiences for consumers and, importantly for us, experiences for lawyers. Lawyers are still stuck with very limited options in terms of working in a compliant and regulated environment. That's traditionally the firm, perhaps of late being a self-employed solicitor through a firm, a consultancy-based model, and we give an alternate option to solicitors who want to work self-employed, or even small firms. We cater to both through sort of the advantages that automation, technology provide around not having to spend your life form filling out paperwork, data entry, and so forth, but instead focusing on what, as a lawyer, you probably went into the industry to do, which is practice the law, change people's lives, work with clients, and be the sort of, we think of it as the superhero, the lawyer as superhero, and reconnect with that inspiration originally to why you became a lawyer. So we think the answer is tech. We're slightly biased here in this regard. But from a consumer point of view, it probably starts with solving a lot of the issues in the way that lawyers are practicing and freeing up lawyers to practice more flexibly and focus on being lawyers, not being admin clerks and form fillers and so on.
Thank you, Pierre. And although I've set up a sort of fight between you and Edward, you can obviously both be right, because I think one thing to recognise is there is more than one public, there is more than one customers. Mm-hmm. And as Edward's shown, there's some customers who want certain things and there's other customers who may want other things.
So my problem is I need to compete with you to get some of your customers, the younger generation generally, but I also need to serve the older generation who aren't as tech comfortable. So I have to have systems in place that capture all that information and all that data and then communicate with them in the various ways that they want to be communicated in. Phone calls, letters, emails. And that's a real problem, and I have to use technology to solve that problem.
Yeah. And I think there is an argument that there is a market that, is maybe tech illiterate, and that we possibly can't serve. But I think there's another market, which you're probably seeing day to day, and we have traditionally seen on the high street in high street law firms, that the tech just hasn't been good enough in the law to allow for, my grandparents are on WhatsApp, right? And it's a simple enough interface for them to use to, the number of like Labrador Retriever memes that my father sends me on WhatsApp, I'd have to block him or whatever. So he clearly knows it too well. So I think the argument, and you can see this, banking is an industry where in the last 10 years you've seen transformative change through the simplification of, yes, tech and infrastructure, and AWS has all been a part of that, but it's actually user experience that is the driver of that. So you see that. I don't know how many of you in the room put up your hand if you use a digital bank at all. Right, so 40% of the UK does. Half of that exclusively a digital bank. Now that is partly generational, but you haven't seen that same transformative change in the law. And we are now at that inflection point. Next 3 to 5 years is the time, it is the moment right now for that change to come. So it is, for us, the singularly most exciting time to be working in this industry, probably its entire history. Maybe I'm being a bit bombastic there, but that's our perspective. AI, part of that, tech, product, really the sort of superset of AI being kind of, that driving force.
Thank you, and I think we'll come on to that. Is the legal sector lagging behind, and also, is that an issue? But perhaps if we come to you now, Rachel, what are your thoughts in terms of what customers expect?
So I too have got 2 hats. So I come from a legal education perspective, and we'll perhaps come back to that in a moment. But my experience of running pro bono and law clinic services, and also I'm currently co-chair of Bristol Pro Bono Group, which brings together the third sector, the universities, and the firms and chambers in Bristol, is that expect isn't really the word. There is so much unmet need out there in terms of access to justice, and this is the theme that keeps coming back up. So from what we've seen in Bristol, and which we explored a bit more through an SRA project to do with access to justice, which we were part of in 2021, that issue of digital exclusion, which I know Lisa is going to touch on as well, is really significant as a starting point, that expect, just need to be able to access legal advice in whatever form that is. And we know that there are black spots in Bristol and the surrounding areas. The West of England Combined Authority have produced an interactive map looking at this, starting with the Lawworks produced a legal advice desert map. Can't remember if it was Lawworks, Law Society, sorry. And guess what? They match up. So there is an issue around age. And I've got relatives who don't have the internet, don't even have a mobile phone, but there is also a real issue around poverty and just not having tech, not having data, and so on, and therefore not being able to interact with the range of services which now require you to fill in forms online. So people need help. So many people need help, and I frame that as help that's first of all accessible. And that's in terms of actually being able to understand the wealth of the material that's out there. So it's not that there's any shortage of information about legal issues. Citizens Advice Bureau, for example, produces really excellent stuff. I'm an employment lawyer, ACAS, good, and so on. And there's lots of this stuff out there, but our clients are telling us that it's just overwhelming. So we did a piece of work with some survivors of domestic abuse recently, and lots of them, actually very educated, do have access to tech and so on, but just overwhelmed by the wealth of information, not able to sift and sort and work out what it was they needed to do. And that the systems that they're being asked to use are supposed to be user-friendly, but actually they're not. So a lot of the forms that people have to use to make applications, all that kind of thing, they can't do it. And, you've got to think, perhaps I shouldn't say this, that there is an agenda somewhere that you're cutting people out by making it so that, yes, you can do this, but actually, guess what, they can't, and somebody somewhere knows that, but it suits them. Benefits appeals is one example there. They need help to process, to work with process. And so we provide an initial service providing advice to clients in the fields of family law, employment law, and consumer contract disputes. And the letters we write to clients tend to be long, and I suspect that a lot of them won't make it to the end, or certainly not when they receive the letters, because we find that we're a one-stop shop. People do come back to us, but we're not resourced to offer representation. So we provide initial advice around the legal issues, and then we have to try and help the client understand what they now need to do to actually take themselves through the process. And there I really feel strongly tech has a place in this. It must be possible for there to be tech which, for those that are able to use it, would help them to put cases together, gather evidence, chronologies and so on. And there are companies out there doing it. So one we've done a bit of work with is Valor, which is a company set up by a group of women from the IT industry who were disaffected by their experience of discrimination, and now they're offering a service so that people can run their own discrimination claims. There's paywalls through it, so it's not free, but some of it is free. And then they need help to access advocacy, and the human element of this keeps coming back up. And you mentioned, and the legal aid is not coming back. So the idea of having somebody to hold your hand throughout the whole of a process for these people is never going to be the reality anymore, unfortunately. I was sat in a room yesterday with a number of people who are sort of stakeholders in the immigration and asylum law area in Bristol, and just the breakdown in terms of what that means. And there just aren't the systems there to help those clients using technology at the moment to actually make their way through what are very complicated situations, and all sorts of things collide there. So where advocacy is needed, that's really where in the pro bono space I think people's time should be spent. What's the human part? And this thing that you're saying about customers, what do they value the most? We know that very often the outcome for our clients isn't, it's important, but actually what they really, really value is having an hour of our time where we sit with them and actually listen and talk with them about their issues. And that feels unsatisfactory because we're not actually providing everything that they need, but we know that that is important. And they need support to just keep going. They need empathy. They need, help to be resilient, and they need the advocacy where they're not able to actually speak for themselves. either because they just don't have the skill sets in the first place, or because the experiences they're going through are so overwhelming. So, for example, in the case of domestic abuse, the women we spoke to who had been through domestic abuse procedures found the court proceedings as traumatising, many of them, as the actual original abuse, and surviving that without somebody there to support you. But if tech could take some of the legal side of that, in terms of the process and what have you, then the very, very limited human resources around pro bono could be provided in that space, and that would be really valuable. So this was my soapbox moment in Bristol, and I'm going to soapbox again. Is the real thing they need is not to be left behind. And there's been a lot of talk this morning about access to justice, but what does that actually mean in a practical sense? So in Bristol, and there was also talk about community, and I absolutely agree. In Bristol, there's a group called Bath and Legal Tech, which is kind of a spin-off. We as Bristol Pro Bono Group are a bit of a spin-off of the Law Society. They are a spin-off. And coming out of that first panel that we did in Bristol, now on my list of things to do across the summer is to get in touch and see if we can get the two of us together. And resource that's going in at the top end, because clearly, Simmons and Allen and Overy and so on have got spin-off companies doing all this stuff. How can that filter down? So I think there's an issue for consumers coming to small and medium-sized firms, that then they don't get left behind in terms of the services that are provided because of cost and so on. But those people at the bottom, we really need every crumb in terms of how those developments can actually put services in place at the bottom. So help and accessible services and empowering services so that people can, where they can, and a lot of them can't, they can take stuff on and be supported to actually do as much as they can so that what resources left can be better applied. And it's the same message, basically. It's just in that sphere, not in a commercial sphere.
Thank you, Rachel. An awful lot to chew on there, and I'm sure we'll get some of that. Just so you know, each panellist has a ration of one soapbox moment. So you've used your one.
Yeah, I know I've used mine up.
So, I wanted to, I suppose, one thing I wanted to ask, Pierre, you picked up the issue of basically, is the legal sector lagging behind when it comes to online services? Put up your hand in the audience if you think the legal sector is lagging behind other sectors when it comes to delivery of services online. Yeah. And then keep your hand up, as most of the room for the benefit of the cameras, and leave your hand up if you think that is a problem. Okay, I think most people who had their hand up originally think it's a problem. Now, Pierre, I think you've already spoke about that. Well, let's go to Edward. What do you think about, is it lagging behind and is that a problem?
I hadn't really thought about that. It's a problem if you're in areas of society where you don't have access to internet. And there are significant areas of Britain where you don't have access to internet. Now, that may be really bizarre sitting in the centre of London, but my property only got connected to the internet last week, my house. So I had no internet, no 3G, 2G, nothing, no fibre, no broadband. And I've been there 15 years. And I'm someone who's quite a tech geek and interested in tech, hence why I'm here. I've set up the first paperless law firm in Britain, or possibly one of the first, good 10 years ago. So I'm really interested in technology, and yet there are vast swathes of Britain that don't have access to internet. So when you say, are we lagging behind? Yes, we are if you compare to certain markets, but maybe like fintech, we're lagging behind. But I'm not sure so much about accountancy. I'm also not sure.
Actually, pause it. Got a lot of business here. Who uses QuickBooks or something, an accountancy service online? Okay, probably about half the audience. And keep your hand up if you use them and you now no longer have sort of a retained accountant. Again, quite a lot of people get their hand up. I suppose I'm just picking up on that because accountancy has actually seen quite a few changes.
It has, but that's a very business-orientated sector, whereas I'd say most normal people don't come across accountants in their day-to-day life, but you have to come across solicitors to do your wills or crime or probate or buying a house, which is something you do relatively often. So comparing yourselves as a profession to those, I think we're slightly ahead. But then looking at the fintech and the banking sector, we're way, way behind. So that question is hard to say where we are as a profession, because I think it depends where you are in the UK and also where you are in your generation and use of technology. So I find that a hard question to answer,
Yeah.
black and white.
That's quite all right. At least, what do you think?
Quite interesting, that last point you made about the use of technology. I think there's always room to improve, definitely. But I think it's probably not so much about how people are using services online, but how they're engaging with it. So what we found, the Legal Services Consumer Panel, is that during COVID, people were using online services sort of 56% of the time, which is quite high for consumers. We're sort of on the other side of COVID, and that's gone right down to around about 36%, even though the availability is there. So that sort of says there's something else there about how they're engaging with it. And I don't know if it's about going back to the issue we had just earlier about that sort of human interaction, or somehow making a bit more meaningful for people. So that, probably not the best way to answer it, but it just looking at the stats, there's a little bit more to consider, I'd say.
Yeah, and from my experience of speaking to consumers, this whole spectrum in terms of how much they trust using tech,
Yep.
trust seems to be a huge issue.
Yep.
Because actually, how do I know I can trust tech? Because it's not a regular product I'm using, and that might explain why some people have drawn back in. I wanted to pick up the results of the poll we've had, which the question we had was, will tomorrow's law firms need to offer more round-the-clock services? Well, this was in a sort of I mentioned the Brexit vote earlier on, and we've got sort of a similar split on this one. So 53% of you said yes, it will in all areas, and then 47% of you said only in selected areas. Does anyone in the audience want to share? Who said yes to the, tomorrow's law firm providing round-the-clock services? Who said yes to that and maybe would like to share why they thought that? Any volunteers? Yeah, the gentleman at the front, if you just get the microphone to you.
Sure, I'll just give one example really that's applicable to our business. We're an immigration law firm. Many of our clients are in many different countries around the world, so they need some sort of access. Many of them at strange times, odd times. In fact, a huge proportion of our clients are pilots, who are, like many other workers, are shift workers. So they don't have the same weekends and times that we do. So they want to have access to legal services.
And how do you resource
times.
that? How do you resource that then?
Well, at the moment, thankfully, we're part of a firm that has multiple offices around the world, but a lot of it is done through electronic means, whether it's WhatsApp, email, Zoom calls and so on, and occasionally some out-of-hours working.
Okay, yes. Who said no to that question? Who was in the 47%? And if you were in the 40%, do you want to share what your view on that question was?
I didn't actually answer, but I would have said definitely no.
Yes.
Because, as you said, it depends on what area of law, and it makes sense that an organisation dealing with immigration internationally, that would be relevant. There's got to be a cut-off. I do think there's to be some health issues as well. As lawyers, we are human beings. Tech is tech, but we're human beings. And to keep being efficient and effective and supportive and empathetic and all the rest of it, you need to have some rest. There needs to be some switch-off time. Forget the tech. We need to have some switch time, think time, brain time, helping time. I'm a property lawyer, and I wanted to get into access to justice. I don't think I need to be there all the time. I think there needs to be some boundaries in terms of no weekends, no evenings.
And do you think your clients understand that?
Oh, they get to eventually.
And I suppose this is interesting, the question of are customers' expectations changing? Does anyone here use web chat as part of their website in terms of law firm? Yeah, and do you service that 24/7? Gentleman who put up his hand here.
Thank you. Yes, we do have this service on our website. There are some software free of charge. Yes, because there are some volunteers in the company, self-employed, so because it is integrated with the mobile phone, so they can reply then and there. So it doesn't matter 6 o'clock or 7 or 8, because whoever picked that one, so most of time, so it may have benefit from that. Yes, we do provide this service. So time.
You have sort of rotating staff.
Correct.
Who
Yes.
are
Yes.
on call.
Whoever picks first. So
Yeah.
that's it. Yes.
And it's interesting, we ran this event in Cardiff a year ago, and there was a woman in the audience who did web chat, but there was so much demand for it, they had to outsource it abroad because there were so many basic queries coming in, which she saw as very much a sign of that there is a shift towards people expecting to do their business at 10 p.m. at night. I know I do it. I do my logistics at that time of night. Pierre, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think there's a traditional view that has been long held that tech undermines or erodes human contact, humanity actually, in a sense, that the human nature of law, and when someone, a consumer, has a legal problem, it's a very often emotional time. I mean, even a property transaction, buying or selling a house, I mean, something transaction like that, let alone a consumer rights issue or a dispute with a neighbor or whatever it might be. It's a very emotional, very human moment in that person's life. And I think there's a sense that the only way to serve that need for human interaction, that need for a sense of humanity delivered by the lawyer, is in person, which is patently, you can see in many different contexts that tech is an enabler of actual human interaction at greater scale, at lower cost and more convenient to the end user. And the impact that has, flipping to the consumer side, both, I mean, we actually start with the lawyer side, impact that lawyer can serve many more clients. And you can see, I think the stat is 40%, 40p of every pound of fees earned for a small firm goes on overhead, not salaries, overhead. And so if you can reduce that, and the lawyer can charge a bit less and serve more clients and get much more joy, but earn, and we see through our platform, typically lawyers can charge half of what they were charging previously working for a firm and earn 3 or 4 times what they were earning in that firm. So it's a win-win. And they're working with more clients, they're getting satisfaction because they're doing just the bit that they are passionate about, which is the human bit, the part of working with a human being, not the part of form filling and admin and being an administrator for maybe a small firm and overhead and rent and business rates and so on and so forth, and dealing with accountants. So I think tech can enable the humanity and the sense of humanity to be brought back into, at scale, the day-to-day life of a lawyer and as a result their client.
Can I add in there as well, and to challenge your perspective or experience? So I'm a property lawyer, and I've got other colleagues who are property lawyers, and the technology that we have is basic technology, but it allows us to work anywhere in the world, pretty much, at any time that the fee earner wants to. So I'm finding clients do want to have contact outside of 9 to 5. I prefer working at 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and finishing at 4 in the afternoon-ish, whereas my other colleagues prefer working quite late at night, sometimes up to 2 o'clock in the morning. And some of them have come off maternity and are more flexible. So they got childcare in the day, and in the evenings they then work. That tech allows them to work when they want to work and also serve clients who want to work, have the contact in the evenings, or I've got a lot of professionals who want to have the contact in the mornings when they're awake at 6, 7 o'clock doing their own work. So I find tech enables us as an office to provide a service outside of 9 to 5 that actually suits the fee earners and suits the solicitors. But it's a mindset, and it's also having that confidence to allow your staff to work when they want and where they want. And that's a challenge for the management to have that confidence.
A really interesting point. I had one more question which I wanted to come to Rachel on, and then we'll come out to questions from the floor, so get them ready. I suppose, Rachel, particularly, you're obviously involved in legal education. To what extent do you think the lawyer of the future will need specialist tech skills? We touched upon that in the first panel session, about where that might land.
Yeah, I'd echo what Sophia said, that the starting point is core tech. So actually, your staff really, really understanding how to use and get the most out of what's available to you without having to spend more money. Thinking about students, so the challenge we've got at the moment is bringing through the lawyers of the future, and the law degree is in the process of changing in response to, in particular, the solicitor's qualifying examination, which has come into play. So the need for a qualifying law degree, which I imagine the vast majority of people in the room did or did a GDL, universities are having to decide now, do you stick with that core curriculum or do you vary? And we're sort of seeing this kind of storm between that quite traditional approach to what law is, which has basically been the same since 1971, since the Ormer Ormerod report, and now this rapid change in what the profession looks like. So Richard Susskind, I don't know if Richard Suskind's work's familiar, hopefully, to you in the audience. For the last 10 years, he's been talking about tomorrow's lawyers and turning up at legal education conferences and absolutely terrifying us by telling us we're completely redundant and irrelevant.
How to make friends and influence people.
Yeah. But I mean, he has been pointing out, for the last 10 years, this shift towards. I'm sorry, I'm straying off the question, but I'm going to make the point. Less is more. More is not. No, which way is that? Less is more is less. More for less. More for less. That's it. More for less. So being able to provide a service more cheaply and that kind of stacking, of tasks. Liberalisation, which I think we're hearing about in terms of different, like Pierre's business, the ways of, and yours, in terms of the way of organising the business model, which is different to what we've had in the past, and technology, and how those three stack together. So for us, working with law students, they come in with still very traditional approaches to what law needs to be, but what we are, and we're running a new degree from the autumn, are trying to instill is that, one, they need to be really, really good with basic technology. And everyone talks about young people as being digital natives, but they're not necessarily. They're very good at Snapchat and all of that, and if anyone's got teenagers or even younger will know all about that. But they're not necessarily good at really, really understanding what technology can do. Law students in particular have we find they have a kind of mindset. So growth mindset was a point that Sophia raised earlier, I think. That's something that I think lawyers of the future really, really need, to start to see how law operates in a different way. We've talked a lot this morning about the individual role of the lawyer, and I think, what we've not mentioned is that a lot of this potentially threatens our sense of law as a profession and professionalisation and what it means to us to be lawyers, because, there is this challenge to actually hand some of what we do over to technology, and a lot of people are going to feel uncomfortable about that. But the reality is that's the way it's going. So core tech, flexible in ways of thinking, a growth mindset in terms of being open to change, creative people, people who can think creatively around the problems. And everyone said start with the problem and then work out how, tech might be the solution, but you don't start with the tech. So you've got to have that mindset. And then you do need a body of people, and these are Richard Suskind's new lawyers of the future with different skill sets who actually do have high-level tech skills, can create things, do understand it. And I think the other thing is the real importance of ethics, and the real need to think about the challenge of ethics in this space, and so inculcating that into our students, so that, because they're very trusting of tech, like you say, the computer says yes, that must be, they just believe, they don't question enough, and you think, well, ethically, where are we going with this? They need to be able to critique, they need to be able to make ethical decisions around clients' needs and all the rest of that. So
thank you.
No,
really interested. And before we come to the floor, Edward, I wanted to, because you've got, we chatted before about challenges you have in terms of training staff and your approach to tech in terms of, do you want to tell our audience how you've approached that?
I suppose the SRA asked me to be here because they see me as an innovator in some ways. I didn't realise I was an innovator, but so I'm a solicitor that's been trained in an old school firms with filing cabinets that you'd have here or all over the place, and paper files. I don't know how many of you still use paper files. I'm hoping. There are some in the audience.
Admit to using paper files.
Yeah, but I admit to it. But there will be, and I know of so many law firms that just use paper files now. They still have a computer, but all of their data storage is on a file. So I wanted to travel the world and have a law firm that I could access my information anywhere in the world. That's how I've been brought up in society with access to technology. But the law firms that I was working for just had this idea that regulatory-wise you had to have a file of papers, and that was sacrosanct. And you had to have that file of papers with you at home if you're working or in the office when you're working. And that's quite limiting when you want to work collaboratively or when you want to give advice outside of hours or you want to travel, because it's physically impossible to take all of your caseload with you. So I looked at technology and tried to mirror the filing cabinet and the files, the matters that you have. And I looked at what's out there that was free and on a subscription basis. So you've got Microsoft, you've got Google, you've got Dropbox, just to name some. And then I looked at which ones gave the easiest use, and I think Microsoft Explorer, just the File Explorer, and Mac OS with their Finder. Those platforms have been designed first and foremost as document storage facilities and to be able to search for documents. And they've had 50 years of the best IT people in the world looking at how to store documents. So my whole law firm is based on just that software, which is, I'd say, free, as long as you can buy the hardware. It comes with the hardware. And it's really easy, and anyone that comes into the law firm has that's used a computer or an iPad or on iPhone or the equivalent, can use my system and our system in the office. And it's expandable. I can have any number of people in, and the cost is the same. And fortunately, there are so many new software providers out there. I've forgotten your name, sorry. There's a Alex, who's got a probate platform that fits into, we use a cloud software program called Clio. And effectively, Clio talks to all of these new programs. And that's really important for my firm to have, on the back end, software that is expandable and can talk to any number of new products that come along. But the core of it is that the data, the files, I can move. They're mine. They're not stored in some fancy case management software that you need, special IT people to convert and to move about. I can take my data and I can move it anywhere, like I can my filing cabinet and my files. And one of the concerns I had in the legacy firms I worked for was that they were in case management systems and they couldn't get it out of that without spending a lot of money to move it. And then when they moved it, it didn't look anything like the old data, and you couldn't search it, and it didn't view the same. And I think that's one of the problems with tech, is that it can move so fast, and you can invest in it, but you end up in a position where 5 years' time, 10 years' time, you can't move out without a huge headache. And I think that's where a lot of firms are stuck in legacy systems, and they're quite scared and apprehensive and unable to move forward because they haven't got their data easily accessible.
Really?
So that's why I think I'm innovative.
No, yes. Well, we won't have a vote on whether you're innovative, but the SRA votes that you're innovative, or actually innovative is about practical stuff. One of these sessions, the most innovative thing or the most beneficial thing one of the speakers said they did was buy everyone in their firm 2 screens to work from home. So that actually made a real difference to how they did it. Now that doesn't sound mind-blowing in terms of innovation, but actually had real practical benefits. Let's come to the floor. So have we got any questions from the floor? Or the seats, or the people? No, well, I've got further questions, so I can jump in. Well, perhaps we'll come back to you, Lisa.
Yeah.
And would you like to expand a bit on this, the Legal Tracker survey, and how consumers' expectations are changing? A bit more detail on that.
Yes, for those that don't know, so we run this survey every year. And that's all about sort of looking at, what consumers are telling us about how they're engaging with legal services, how they're choosing, using, what they expect, all of the things we've been talking about. So there's some key, I guess, sort of trends we've been sort of noticing in this last tracker. So first of all, what's really good to see is that the figure, those people that are shopping around and that are saying that they are finding information around price and sort of reputation, that's increasing, which is really good. Because price transparency is such a big issue for people to be able to see and to be able to compare. So that's been increasing. So we've had, I think, roughly about almost 2/3 of people sort of saying that, they've been able to access that information. The other thing we're seeing is unbundling. I'm sure most of you know about unbundling in here.
Just to check, who knows what unbundling is? Put your hands up. So it's probably not most of you, and actually just to give a shout out, the SRA published a report on unbundling after a pilot with firms the other week, and actually one of the key things we identified was law firms don't know what unbundling is, and also consumers don't know what unbundling is. So a competition is if you can come up with a better word for unbundling. But do you want to explain? What unbundling is?
It's effectively carving up the work. So you need a legal service. You're carving up the work. You're saying these bits I'll do, and these bits the lawyer will do, and it really helps to keep costs down. So what we find in citizens' advice, for example, some people come to us. There's certain elements we can help them with, and that's free, obviously, to them. And then there's certain elements we go, okay, this is the bit where you need the lawyer, so you'll engage for that particular element. And obviously, it's all about cost, isn't it, for people? But what's important? Yes, the SRA report was fantastic, and we've obviously read it in the consumer panel. But what's good is that figure is increasing. I mean, it's 19%. You wouldn't think it's a lot, but it is because it's been steadily increasing, and now it's sort of at the level it was at its when it peaked. So it's the highest it's ever been. Which is really good. And we want to continue to see that because it's a really, really good way to people to access services because they think, I can't afford it. But actually, if you can carve it up and the bits that you can do, you realize, actually, I can afford it. And, it just makes it much more accessible, much more easy.
And it won't be appropriate for every client.
No, it won't be.
You need to understand what the expertise of your client is or capability in order to do that.
Yeah, so a classic example, again, using my citizens advice hat, what we would do is the bits that our advisors can do, they will do, but then we have great relationships with local pro bono lawyers, and then, that bit we'll sort of pass on to them. And, again, that's still free to the client, but obviously that's in our area, that's, not sort of national.
And we know there's a lot of fears around unbundling, sort of how will this impact on insurance, what with the principles. Have a look at that report because we've published, because actually it tries to provide some reassurance and further work we need to do on that. And also actually, we ran this event last year in Brighton. There was one firm on there who's done unbundling for 10 years and it really works well for their firm as a business model. So if you're interested, have a look at that. Perhaps I'll come back to you, Pierre. I think it was Steve Jobs said it wasn't about giving customers what they want. It was almost identifying or figuring out what customers are going to want. And I suppose you founded a number of successful startups. So what would your advice be to someone here or business who's trying to, got an idea and trying to identify what customers want?
I think Jobs was channeling Henry Ford in saying that, who famously said, if you ask the consumer what they want, they will tell you faster horses. He didn't make faster horses in the end. So I think there's probably limits to, you start with identifying a problem. That's how any progress is made. And there are many to identify in our industry on both sides, both for the consumer and, as I've tried to articulate, for the lawyer too. It's clear that there are challenges ahead, and reconnecting with the joy of practicing the law is probably the central objective for any lawyer, is what gives you joy on a day-to-day basis. So I think my advice to lawyers or non-lawyers looking to create something in the legal tech space would be get out of the building and put something out into the world and see what happens. And that really is, I think, the ethos that I've always had in my career, but also that drives real change and innovation, is not overthinking it, not over-talking it, but really going and doing and trying something and be driven by one's passion, one's real connection with joy. For us, that has been our user, our customer is actually lawyers. It's not the consumer, although through our platform we serve thousands of consumers on a monthly basis. But from the lawyer's point of view, if you're a lawyer and you're finding that you are not, every day experiencing joy in what you're doing, come and talk to us. We'd love to talk to you.
Thank you. Excellent. We've got first question at the back. If you come to the Alex, was it Alex?
It was Alex from Exzen. Thanks. I was really pleased to hear what Rachel was saying about about thinking about how technology goes into training, courses for training new legal professionals. But there was a report published last week, which was research from the University of Manchester, UCL, and I think it was sponsored. Who was it sponsored by? It's sponsored by. It might be SRA or it might be the Law Society, but it was actually a little bit depressing reading to me because
definitely wasn't SRA then.
because it was really one of the things that, back to Sophia's point this morning about culture, it was about the almost like authority and desire of existing practitioners to learn, to speculate, and to just find new ways of doing things. There was almost a barrier to learning and a barrier to adopting and seeing that careers might be limited by trying new ways of doing things. I mean, Evan and I had a chat earlier, and I think he's downplayed the sort of the digital nature of his business. What he's done is really, really impressive. But actually, it doesn't feel from that report as though there's a lot of license in other organisations to do that. My question really is that a concern to you all? And if it is, how do we change that?
I want to go first on that one.
I'd just come back from, with my education hat. Yes, that is a concern. And it's also a concern in relation to, young lawyers who are trying to come through and gain experience. I mean, at the moment, our advice going forward to our law students is very much, get your basics in terms of understanding the law, build your critical thinking skills and your understanding of all of that. But you've got to build this stuff as well, and hopefully if they do that, then they will find themselves as very employable, because actually firms will be looking for those types of staff in the future, possibly to solve problems they're not quite sure how to solve themselves. What do you do with this stuff? But if higher up the firms, people are just sort of sitting and not making change, there's the worry is that actually in terms of, I know we're being told that tech will just free people up to do other things, but the reality is for the young lawyers coming through, many of them get their start as paralegals. And it's the less is more, I can't get it right, more is less, less is more, whichever one of those. But basically doing it more cheaply is going to lean towards tech, and that is going to reduce those jobs. I can't see how it can't.
Yeah, I mean, are we going to see flatter law firms?
Yeah, if you're going to knock out a layer,
more people at the top and less that pyramid.
Yeah. So if you're going to knock out a layer, then you're going to have to people are going to have to offer a higher level of skills, legal skills and tech skills, in order to get a foot on the ladder in the first place. So if that's been blocked, and time will change that, but. This is well, I'm not really answering your question. I'm agreeing with you. I think it's an issue. Yeah. Lawyers are lawyers,
Does anyone else
we're trained to think in a certain way.
Does anyone else want to either agree with Alex or answer his question, or
just waffle?
Well, I've had experience of being in law firms where they wouldn't move forward with technology, and it was so frustrating as a younger lawyer to know there are better ways out there, and not AI, none of that stuff. It was just simple, basic software and hardware that's out there. Even having two screens or one large screen. I wanted a 27-inch screen. This is 15 years ago. And the practice manager said, no, you could have a 17-inch screen because everyone else has got one. But I said, I work with two A4 pieces of paper side by side. I need that space. I'm working digitally. No, everyone has 17-inch screens. So she went and bought a 17-inch screen, which is more expensive than a 27-inch screen. And, just that basic, very basic issue of hardware, they couldn't get over. So let alone the case management system and the use of generative AI and portals where they can give you information. That's just, and frankly, that's how most of the law firms that I come across. That's my experience. And the managers are the problem, because they're stuck in a way, and they don't see the very basic improvements you can get from just basic technology improvements. And I think that's, you've got a fantastic system, and I bet you most of the lawyers at CPA's work probably go, that's brilliant, and they'll embrace it. But the managers, they're not interested. They're stuck in their ways.
I mean, I presume you agree your system is brilliant, but there are other systems available in the interest of impartiality. If we come down here, and I think we'd have final two questions from these two gentlemen on the front row.
Hi, thanks. Just following on from the points there about the sort of stagnation. Do you think there's the fear of a lot of law firms being left behind if they don't adapt to the times then, with regards to this? Because that's...
They're already left behind.
Yeah, almost leading back to the house on fire situation from the first part of the session.
Well, we're lucky to have one here that admitted to using paper files, but I can tell you there are so many law firms I come across that just use paper files.
Yeah.
And they are already left behind.
Yeah. Does anyone not agree with that there's a risk of being left behind? No, shall we move then on to this gentleman here?
Thank you. My name is Carlos from the Law and Tech LLM at King's College. So seeing that the implementation of technology and artificial intelligence would streamline and automate legal processes within legal firms or in-house legal departments, do you think that it is going to drive the costs up because the quality is going to be better? Or, I mean, documents could be perfect or closer to perfection? Or do you think it is going to drive the costs down because you are going to need less time input to produce a document? I can think of reasons for each of the two approaches. How do you think the prices are going to go down with this technology implementations?
Anyone want to have a go at that one?
I mean, this is totally outside of my domain, but I spoke to a partner in a mid-sized firm, and we were talking about tech and GPT, and he said, I actually do use GPT for some client work, and I said, does it save you time? And he said, yeah, actually, it's something that would take me 3 hours, I could do in an hour. But I have to end up billing my client for the 3 hours, because otherwise I'm going to get in trouble that I didn't spend the 3 hours and it wasn't billable to the client because I only spent one. So there's a fundamental
which raises questions, I think.
problem around, right, who shall remain anonymous, obviously. But needless to say, but it is verifiable. But there's a fundamental issue around incentive and the incentive structure of the billable hour, and we could probably talk about that as a dedicated breakout panel discussion, independent of this. But it was fascinating to me coming from, obviously we're building a tech company that allows lawyers to operate completely independently. So totally different mindset around how you bill your clients and how you work and operate. But I do think that firms have that fundamental sort of paradox to solve in the next few years.
I mean, one of the interesting points that's come up, I can't remember where I was reading about this, but is the fact that if you are now a medium-sized firm and you don't have hundreds of bodies and all the rest of it, there are certain types of work that you can't do. But if you embrace this stuff, there'll come a point where you can do it, and then you're in a position to challenge
the big players.
The big players, because actually you can turn out the same quality of work, and you can charge less because your overheads are lower. You've got rid of, everyone will have got rid of their paralegals. That's my depressing future. Hopefully not. And the market will drive the price, won't it? And gradually, those that are agile and actually think again about their business model are more willing to move away from the sanctity of the billable hour and all the rest of it, and actually price in a way that, as consumers tell us they want, and maybe unbundle and offer, embrace all of that. They're the ones that are going to be surviving, aren't they?
I mean, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, if there's large-scale litigation, there's some litigation that only large firms can do because they can call on the army of paralegals.
That will no longer be the case.
That might go out the way. And I probably would say businesses are fairly savvy consumers, so if there is a price, if there is someone who's offering something at a better price point, interesting to know, do you think the same price drive will happen? Because if the market's working well, if a firm's doing things more affordably and offering that, do you think consumers will respond to that, or do you think it's more murky?
Probably a bit more murky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I spend all my time thinking about this question at the moment, but it depends on what AI is as well, because to tech people, it's pretty advanced technology, but then you can, like the first speaker, the SRE, was it Tom, said, it's inbuilt into your phones now, and we're using generative AI. So I look at what we have at the moment with the internet, or prior to the internet, we had libraries, and all of the information that lawyers know was out there in the public domain. But you went to a lawyer because they could understand the words, they could understand the case law, and how to apply it to a circumstance. Now we have the internet, that public knowledge is a lot easier to access at any time of day or night. And still people come to you as a lawyer because they want you to decipher that knowledge and apply it to that very specific circumstance. Or it could be a will. You're taking into consideration all of their family circumstances, their finances, their geography. And I think AI is going to be able to give some answers, but I'm not sure whether it'll be specific enough to that person in the next 5 or 10 years. I'm not. For me, it's a question of how long it's going to take to get to give specific advice that the client understands and can rely on.
Sorry, so there's a split there, isn't there, between individual advice to people with individual legal problems and needs and big pieces of legal work with a lot of potential for automation and so on, where the price should, in theory, start to come down.
Really interesting. Now, I joked at the start in my presentation that I bought out salary insurance before the event, but I don't want to see whether that becomes a reality, so I'm very mindful I do want to not run over. So I wanted to say a huge thank you to all our panellists. Bit of a different discussion, actually, to the first one, but really good. So if I could have a round of applause for them, thank you. I found this morning and this afternoon really interesting and useful. As I say, we've got the SRA, there's a number of SRA staff here, a number of members of our board and our chair as well. I know, speaking to them in the break, they are finding these insights really useful, both from out there and on the stage. So thank you for that. There's a lot for us to chew on.